My name is Dr. Kenya Hamid, and I'm a neuropsychologist at the Child Mind Institute. We're a national nonprofit that supports children and families with gold standard mental health care, advice, and resources, all online and accessible to everyone. We are here for you wherever you are with expert telehealth resources, including diagnosis and treatment of mental health and learning disorders, group programs for anxiety, mood disorders, ADHD, and more, and remote neuropsychological evaluations. Please visit childmind.org/telehealth to learn more. Now, with protests over the violent death of Black Americans dominating the news, it's understandable that many kids are feeling scared, confused, or angry about the situation. We are all thinking about racism and violence and how to raise caring children and talk to them about what's happening in our society. We are happy to try to answer all of your questions about whatever parenting challenges you have and anxieties that you are facing yourselves. Today, I'd like to talk about remote learning and accommodations in the fall and answer your questions about that and anything else you're wondering about. So just post your questions in the feed. We'll also post some links to helpful resources on childmind.org. Remember, we're here every day and we look through your questions daily. All right, so let's get to it. So we already have just some questions that have come in. Now, our first question is from Delilah. She writes, I have no idea what school will look like when it starts next year. How can I make sure my daughter's IEP is being honored in this new environment? Okay, so one of the first things that I will say is that, all children who have disabilities are entitled to the right to a free and appropriate public education. And so if you have an IEP, which is an individual education plan, that is a legal document. And so, the school, if they've given it, they have to honor that. Now, what exactly that'll look like, depending on what this school year looks like, that is going to be what will be challenging for many families, including you, Delilah. So I won't necessarily be able to give you any sort of specifics because I would agree with you. I don't know exactly what the fall is going to bring, what exactly it is going to look like, but whether that's going to be entirely all remote learning, entirely all in classroom instruction, or there might be a hybrid of the two, whatever is being offered and, I guess what I'm really thinking about is that if there needs to be changes to your child's IEP because of the changes to what the learning will look like in the fall, then you will need to have a team meeting to kind of go over what those changes might look like so that your IEP can be revised. Now, if that doesn't happen, then it would be the school's responsibility to follow the IEP as it's currently written. So whether or not your IEP will stay the same or it should be modified under the new changes, that is going to be the part that's variable, and that's the part that I'm not entirely sure what will look like. But I just want you to know that if there needs to be changes to your child's IEP, then I would want to request a team meeting. And typically your child's teacher or even your child's principal would know who that point person is for your child's IEP. So I hope that was helpful, even though I don't have an exact answer on how to answer that. All right, so our next question is from Veronica, and she writes, my son has to go to summer school. He's entitled to school-based services, but our school is not providing them. So What do I do? All right. So, Veronica, I've got quite a few questions to ask about this particular question, because it's kind of loaded. So, first and foremost is what I would want to know is if your child has to go to summer school, is this something that's already been written into his IEP? So, that would be a big difference between if it's already in there because it's part of his educational goals, or if it's more so because he hasn't passed some classes and he needs to attend summer school in order to continue to the next grade. Now, if this was already included in his IEP that he would require summer learning, and it's for a specific IEP goal, well, then I would have to agree with you that he's going to need those school-based services to kind of help him meet whatever those measurable IEP goals are. And without them, it would be quite difficult to do so. So I guess I would want parents really to think about, what exactly is the context for your child needing to attend summer school, and what exactly that looks like as far as the school-based services, because this question doesn't necessarily identify what that looks like. But if your child needs these sort of services, they're already included in his IEP and they're not being provided, one thing that I would definitely recommend if you are not getting the necessary support that you need from your child's school is to contact your state's Board of Education. And I'm hoping there that you might be able to get a little bit more guidance as to what to do in these sort of circumstances, as well as, if you kind of need more of an individualized follow-up and further advice, I would recommend you give us a call at the Child Mind Institute, as we do offer telehealth consultations with these sorts of problems, and we can see if we can help you problem solve this issue as well. All right, so we're just kind of really moving along today. Our next question, this is from Lisa, and she wants to know, how can I support my dyslexic son during the summer? So I've got some colleagues that are kind of in the same boat as you are, and they're working with their children who have dyslexia during the summer. And one thing that was highly recommended to me was an app called Lexia Learning. It's spelled Lexia learning.com. I think they have the yearly subscriptions for approximately $100 to $150. And they have just kind of like structure-based literacy types of reading intervention programs for children. Now, their 4-5 program is for children who are in elementary school, whereas their Power Up program is for kids who are, kind of middle school and up. And it is also a program that kids can use on their tablet. So that kind of just makes it accessible to kids learning and not necessarily having to sit with a laptop if you guys have more of a smaller device within the home. Very easy to use is what I've been told about that. So I would recommend that app to use, as well as I think you're wanting to continue to reinforce just regular reading daily. So I'd recommend typically between 20 to 30 minutes of reading with your child just throughout the summer. That's a good way to continue to practice and refine those skills, as well as for families that can afford having a remote tutor. I mean, there's plenty of programs at this time that we've got tutors, online tutoring services, and just making sure too that wherever you decide to go, if you're interested in remote tutoring services, that you're using somebody who has experience with structured literacy types of programs. So this is somebody who has a good understanding of phonics, phonological awareness, and just kind of teaching those sort of skills to kids, in addition to other skills that are needed for reading, as that's not the only one. Yes, and you know what? We also have too. Catherine Norris is noting to getting kids to listen to books on CD in the car and Audible by Kids, and as that makes learning more fun during the summer. And I absolutely have to agree with you on that, right? So I think any opportunity that you can get to just get kids to read is going to be a beneficial and fun opportunity. It can also be helpful to allow kids to pick out what it is specifically, especially for young ones that do have difficulty reading. And so oftentimes when something's difficult for you, you're going to want to avoid it and not do that. So by giving them more options as to the books that they can read or that work with them on, makes it just that much more exciting and doable for kids, to kind of focus and practice reading. All right. So we also have another question. This one is from Dina. She writes, my daughter really struggled with remote learning. What skills can we work on over the summer that might make next year less stressful? So one thing I would want to know is what exactly was the struggle for your child when it came to remote learning? Was it just like grasping the concepts? Was the technology getting in the way? Just kind of focus and attention issues? Because I think, there are many different things that potentially a child could struggle with when it comes to remote learning outside of the actual curriculum. Time management could have been an issue, but what I would say is just in thinking about foundational skills with kids, as I'm not entirely sure how old your child is, I would go back to reading is going to be an important skill that I would want to practice, as well as math. Now, as you transition into the summertime, oftentimes lots of kids get breaks during this time period. And so as you wanting to continue to refine these skills, I think maintaining some level of structure, maybe you're going to reduce the amount of time that you would typically do for remote learning, just kind of over the summer as you're giving kids a little bit more of a break. But I think 20 to 30 minutes of reading practice would be beneficial, as well as maybe even 20 to 30 minutes a day of just basic practice in math and learning those concepts. And if your kid is having difficulty focusing and wanting to do these sort of activities, this could be helpful as well when it comes to practicing and fine-tuning these types of skills, is that you're only going to have to, kids only have to do it for a set amount of time. And so, just kind of encouraging them to, okay, it's 20 to 30 minutes of maybe reading in the morning or nap in the afternoon, or switching it up, or just kind of doing it all in one sitting. And that way, kids are not going to lose those vital skills over the summer. All right, so we have another question from our audience, which says, and this is from Julia. She wants to know, my child has comforting habits like tongue suckling, belly button digging, sniffing fingers. This is much more prominent now, and she will do it continuously given the chance. Is it a benign habit, or should I be discouraging it? She's 4. Aw. So, To me, the first thing that I think of is this is just kind of more like fidgety types of behaviors. And it could be indicative of like boredom or maybe that she's just kind of feeling uneasy. And I think kind of in the climate that we're at with a lot of racism and violence going on and a lot of talks about those sort of things, potentially that might be one explanation of why you might be seeing it more often now than you did before, or also too that she's just kind of home more and maybe she has less to do compared to before where she was might have been in school and might have been um, distracted and kind of occupied enough to not have as much downtime. But I would not be overly concerned about this. I think as far as wanting to discourage it, there might be some of those behaviors in there that you might feel like, well, as far as kind of etiquette and good manners, these are kind of not best practices. So you might discourage her from, you know, digging in her belly button. But I wouldn't be overly concerned that there is something like very wrong with her for doing these types of behaviors. So I hope that, oh, and okay. So you're saying you're worried it's a sign of anxiety, and I would agree it could be a sign of anxiety. Just keep in mind that that doesn't necessarily mean that it is. It could be. Um, you're thinking about what are some of the changes before. I had mentioned about her just being, it could just be boredom, right? She might have previously, um, her time might have been just kind of used and utilized in a different way where she was so busy that she didn't necessarily have to do these things. So, but once again, I would not worry too much about this. Great question. All right, guys. I mean, we are checking out the comment section of this Facebook Live. Um, so, if you guys have any sort of questions, concerns, it could be about this topic of, remote learning and going for school in the fall with accommodations for children. We can answer questions about that or else other questions that you may have that might be outside of that specific topic. Feel free to ask and I'll do my best if I can answer them. So, all right, so we've got a comment from Melissa. And so she says, I want my daughter to read 30 minutes a day. She asked if she can listen to short story podcasts. Instead, she started listening to the podcast during quarantine. What is your opinion? I'm thinking about learning the spelling of words and sentence structure. Okay, so now her listening to the podcast, I would not equate with reading 30 minutes a day, right? So on one hand, she is still getting good language exposure, right? If she's listening to podcasts, it might be meaningful information that she's benefiting from. But I would have to agree with you if we're talking about learning the spelling of words, just kind of her pronunciation of words, then why not either add in um, additional time to read, and maybe you won't make it 30 minutes then, because if this podcast is something that she's interested in, we don't want to necessarily take that away from her because I think that it can be very beneficial. But what about maybe adding like 15 minutes of book reading before she listens to the podcast? That might be a good compromise rather than taking it away. But I do agree with you that reading and then just kind of listening to a conversation, advice, kind of whatever it is, whatever she's learning on the podcast, so they're not exactly the same. All right, well, time has gone super fast for me today. So if we don't have any more questions, then I want to thank you guys all for joining me today. I hope it was helpful. And remember that we're here every day to support you in this extraordinary time. So the Child Mind Institute is here to help with the mental health and parenting needs of this coronavirus crisis, no matter where you are. So please visit childmind.org/telehealth to learn more about the incredible variety of telehealth resources we have available during this time for children, teens, and young adults. So be safe and thank you.